All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Kati Shepardson, and I'm thrilled to get to spend the next hour and 15 minutes with you. I am aware of what presentations at conferences typically look like, and that I could give you a presentation and talk for the next hour. I would be bored if we did that, and you might be too, and I really want today to have something that you can take away and have practical application. And so I'm going to ask you to participate in whatever way works for you that will help you get the information that you are hoping to out of a talk like this. So I know they did say up front, and hopefully I didn't ask ahead of time, but hopefully not breaking too many rules. If you have a question based on something that I just said, or you want me to clarify something I just said, I'm neurodivergent. I don't think interruptions are rude. The idea that I said something that sparked an idea in your brain gets me excited, and I'd love to hear it. So I know it's a larger group. We're not having just a one-on-one conversation. So of course, if you do have questions that you think you could wait till the end, I will make sure to have time at the end for questions as well. But please do feel free to just be like, hey, can you expound on that a little bit more? Or what about this? I don't know if you considered it, and this is my population, and that would be helpful for me. Happy to do that. I was telling some others, like, this is for me sort of a choose your own adventure. I have way more slides in a presentation that I could possibly cover, but that's going to be because I can skip over some. I don't think we need to define what autism is today, but maybe if someone was asking a specific question, I don't have to be like, oh, I wish I had included that slide that we could all reference. So you'll see me do that as well. So this is the way that I'm almost having a neurodiversity affirming talk about neurodiversity affirming care. So that's going to start with, what do you need right now to participate? So for me, it's going to be fidget in one hand, different kind of fidget in the other hand that hopefully I don't fidget with too much. Don't want to break this one, and don't want to unintentionally go to the next slide. But contact information is down there at the bottom, and then you'll see I'm also a PhD candidate. So what that means is I'm not yet a psychologist, but I'm training to be a clinical psychologist. And my entire training has included this neurodiversity affirming care model because I myself am neurodivergent, like I said, autistic and ADHD, and wasn't diagnosed until 5 years ago. So that actually was the bridge that allowed me to start seeing who I am and what I need and how I can be successful in spaces. So I'm going to encourage you to do some of that exploration today of just what you need and checking in with yourself. Okay. So we're going to go through a lot. There were some learning objectives, but basically it's the take home of like, what in the world is this neurodiversity affirming model? I'm going to assume that some of you know what that means very deeply, and others of you maybe are still wondering what we mean when we say certain words. So I will kind of ground us in some just foundational concepts and vocabulary so we are shared conversation, but then we'll go a little bit deeper as well. And then I also always have a disclaimer before I start that I cannot possibly cover everything related to neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and what we mean when we're saying this type of approach when we're working with autistic individuals. So that's my disclaimer. I will be disappointed at the things that I can't cover, but also hopefully this is a great start of a conversation that you can continue having in the breaks and throughout the rest of the conference, and then back in your own spaces. The reason I start presentations with the disability model is because one of the foundational, like the trailblazers that led to the neurodiversity affirming movement was the social disability model. We all still function, more or less, I'm going to make that assumption about you, in a medical model. I use the DSM to make diagnoses, and that has about deficits, right? Deficits in social communication, deficits in the nonverbal aspects. And social disability is kind of, it doesn't discredit that there might be something about the person that's innate to them, but that the actual disability comes because of barriers in the environment. So it's person plus their environment that creates disability. That's our social disability model. And when we understand that doesn't mean that there isn't something about the person that might be different, it means that it's not inherently a problem. So when we use an example of someone who is in a wheelchair because they are not able to walk on their own, some people would just say not walking is the disability. And I would say stairs are disabling, because if you have a wheelchair and you can get around, you may not actually have barriers in your environment. And so you could see how we could spend an entire kind of hour talking about the foundations of what really, like, what is within the individual and what's within the environment. What I'm just going to do today, though, is introduce you to this idea that there's an interplay between the person plus their environment creating the disability, but that when we remove barriers, we remove disability. So that starts to tell me, actually, that it isn't necessarily something that's only within the individual. So really quick, super fast overview, but that's sort of the foundation that we then get to say neurodiversity and what this movement means and why it's important is we're saying that we don't want to just stay in this deficits model and what's wrong with the person, and instead to celebrate that all brains are different, all bodies are different, and one is not inherently right or wrong. Okay. While we're going to specifically talk about autism today, I'd like this statistic to be up in front. At least 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent. So we're talking about a minority of people, but we are not talking about a sliver, right? And this is the lived experience of probably a lot of people in this room, whether you're diagnosed or not diagnosed. You may identify with different ways of being neurodivergent, and I'm even going to define that here in just a moment, but to say it's many, many of us. So broadly speaking, when we say the neurodiversity paradigm, we're thinking of a few things. I already said one of them, all brains are different. I don't know about you, but a lot of my textbooks assume that all brains are the same. And so it seems almost like a statement that doesn't need to be said, that all brains are different, and yet in our training and in the spaces and in the measures that we use, we're assuming this normativity and we're assuming similarity when not a single one of us is alike in every single way. And so foundationally, and also that this word, neurodiversity, includes everybody. All brains are different. We're not talking about who's different from each other, just that all of us are different. And then we end up with this word called neurotypes, so things such as autism and ADHD and OCD, and we'll talk about some other things that fall under this umbrella as well. But these would be considered different ways of brains being, so neurotypes. Neurodivergent versus neurotypical, we're seeing a lot more about neuronormative and neuronormative expectations being used even more frequently, but where we're saying some people are neurodivergent because they diverge from those neuronormative expectations. And then, already said neurodiversity includes everyone, so when we say neurodiversity, we are not talking about specific people. That word is inclusive of everybody. And then differences, right? That we're not just looking at what's wrong with somebody, but instead we're getting to say, this is something that is different about the way that they engage with the world around them. And then the use of identity-first language, and I have actually a couple picture representations that are going to talk about how do we describe people who are autistic individual versus person with autism, and why we might do any one of those things. Small print for those of you in back, but neurodiversity, I've already described this idea that all brains are different and it includes everyone. Neurodiverse, I'm going to introduce you to the language as the words are defined and also describe how they're commonly misused. I see neurodiverse, and actually just was recognized in my program for working with neurodiverse individuals. Neurodiverse is all of us. More than one type of brain together is neurodiverse. That word, we can use that when we're talking about neurodivergent to say like a neurodiverse family might be someone, one of the parents is ADHD and the kid is autistic, and then neurotypical other parent. So that would be a neurodiverse family, but one person isn't neurodiverse. We do often see these words used to mean different things, but I'm just introducing you to how I will be using them and how I'd recommend using them as well. Neurotypical, notice I said the so-called norm. There isn't a person who is typical in every way. And so we're not actually saying who's neurotypical, who's not neurotypical. We're saying that people who diverge more from what is typical are going to have more barriers in their environment. And something that is not on one slide and only one slide, it's kind of encompassed in all of them. When we say neurodivergent, that is not just neurodevelopmental conditions. So even though I'm going to be talking about neurodiversity affirming clinical practice for autistic individuals, this is any brain that diverges from that neuronormative expectations, okay? So the deviation from that expected norm is neurodivergent, and then that it's a sociopolitically disadvantaged group, meaning just because you're different, that's not inherently bad, but you are going to be in disadvantaged positions in a society that was structured on these neuronormative expectations. So here's, I have intentionally included with the handles or citations of some of the individuals who I love their resources so that you have access to those resources. Sunny Jane Wise is a huge advocate in neurodivergent affirming practice, and one of my favorites made the DBT, neurodivergent friendly book of DBT skills that I actually use with a lot of my adult and teen clients. But so each individual is neurodivergent, anything from autism to someone who stutters, bipolar, ADHD, and the group together, including someone who would be neurotypical, is this neurodiverse group because there are a variety of brains functioning together. Okay, so that's your vocab lesson. We're good? Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Also though, like, don't be afraid to try to use the language, and then it's cultural humility. Like, I get it wrong all the time, but I'm humble, and like I'm wanting to use the language that works for somebody. So try it out, and then, but also it's okay if we like just correct each other if kindly if we're misusing it, so that we can all be better and use the language how it was intended, at least in this moment. So language use. My mom worked in, I remember the language around it, special education with visually impaired. Now we start moving some of those words of vision differences, limited vision. But I grew up in a household that we had all of the different accommodations, and there were canes, and she was like traveling over Chicago blindfolded to learn how to use all the walk signals, and it fascinating. So I was born into a space that also wanted us to use person-first language, person with a disability, right? That was especially important for things like depression and anxiety, person with depression, because we want to make sure we're creating space to say you are not the depression. We had advocates really in some of the social disability and disability rights saying, actually, I cannot separate myself from being blind. I am a blind person, and we now even capitalize the B in blind, deaf, right? The deaf community. Some people might prefer person with deafness or person with blindness, but as a whole, the community has said, hey, we cannot separate ourselves from this experience. And the same thing has happened in autism spaces, that the people with lived experience largely are choosing, like over 90% choosing to use identity-first language, saying I'm an autistic person, I cannot separate myself from that. You end up seeing caregivers and support workers opting to use the sort of where my mom's training, and then still to this day, of saying it's more respectful to put the person first, right? The flip of that is like, if you have to say person first to respect me, that means you're not respecting me in the first place. So at the end of the day though, ask people what they prefer. The APA, which is where I write all of the things that I write under their guidance, says to use both and to use them interchangeably, and even to describe why that you're using the choice of language that you are to respect individuals. And that's knowing that some people will prefer one over the other. A little fun fact is that people who tend to view their autism as a negative will tend to prefer I'm a person with autism. Whereas people who see it as an overall positive and a valued part of their identity tend to prefer. So here's a little graphic as well. You can see why someone was saying, like, it is just a thing that I have. I might say I'm a person with autism, whereas every single part of me, it's with me every moment of every day. I'm an autistic person. So I do personally tend to use more of the identity-first language as well. And then Sunny Jane Wise, one more time with the lived experience educator, the neurodivergent umbrella. You'll see this on uncredited on LinkedIn all over the place. But this idea where it's an inclusive term, right? We are meaning different brains, different bodies, and in certain situations, some people are going to be more disadvantaged than others. But it really is inclusive. The people who coined the phrase meant it to be as inclusive as possible. I'm going to actually skip over a few of these, but One of the other resources that I love is Dr. Megan Anna Neff. They have the Neurodivergent Insights website, and I have a couple graphics from them later on. But I heard her on a podcast describe the difference between accommodation and compensation. And accommodation shouldn't cost the individual anything. It does cost us a lot of social interaction to get the accommodation in place, unfortunately, but the actual equal access is an accommodation, and compensation strategies are things that we do to kind of push our way through and make it through using some of our other abilities, but it ends up costing us a lot of energy. So things like masking, it is a strategy that we all use it, but autistic individuals, especially if you're masking your autistic trait and not feeling like you can be yourself in a room, that costs a lot of energy, and that's why a lot of the teens and adults are showing up in our offices. The presenting concern is depression and suicidality and being done with life and feeling just inherently broken, and that comes from that exhaustion and tireless masking. And so a lot of the intervention, which we'll get to, that'll be my favorite part to dig into with you all, is like, well, what do we do, and what does this look like for supporting people? It's to know the cost of masking, and then to be able to choose when and where to do it, and to have spaces where you don't need to do that. And then I think at this point, the very first time that I gave this presentation 3 years ago, I had to describe every single word on this page. I think most of these will be familiar to you at this point, but just to say that these are words that people coming to us are likely seeing on social media and are having conversations about, and it's second language to them. And then when their providers don't know what they mean when they say something, that can put us on the outside. So just knowing what some of these words are, that you probably have heard a lot of them, and if not, really quickly gonna run through. And actually enjoy this morning, special interests, right? So rather than highly fixated and restricted interests that are abnormal in intensity and focus, there's your DSM diagnostic criteria, right? Or special interests. Like, we are passionate humans, and so the things that we're interested in, that we could call it, I'm still okay with restricted interests, like slightly negative, but it just is what it is. Like that restricted interest that gets us excited about things. Meltdown, shutdown, overwhelm, and burnout. I put those all together to say these are the main presenting concerns that I'm working with individuals, that it's your whole nervous system, either going to the hypoarousal, hyperarousal, but in general, the system has had too much and it needs a release. And so it either shuts down or has the meltdown. The pathological demand avoidance or persistent drive for autonomy. I primarily am working with autistic individuals who would be diagnosed with level 1 autism and who are actively speaking, oftentimes co-occurring intellectual giftedness. It's like that is part of my situatedness. And then across the lifespan, I didn't mention that. So I'm working with some kids, and all the kids that I'm working with currently have this PDA profile of autism, but we don't actually know if it's just part of autism, if it's also part of ADHD. They've been doing this work a lot longer in the UK and Australia, and we're kind of new to it here in North America. But this idea that when a perceived slight of autonomy, you told me what to do, could even be a suggestion. I might have told myself to do it, go brush your teeth. That demand coming into the nervous system is perceived as though like it's a fight-flight response every single time a demand is placed on the individual. And so what does that end up looking like? Big emotional overwhelm all throughout the day. And so very difficult to work with, and I'm guessing a lot of individuals that we're working with trying to help them solve problem behaviors might be dealing with these like perceived slights to their autonomy, and then how to respond to them in a way that doesn't send their system into needing to protect itself and either fight or flee. And then often more considered a subtype of ADHD would be this rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? That correction, being told we're wrong or accidentally upsetting somebody can really take a toll on individuals. Spoon theory. For anybody who's been in chronic health spaces, this is where the autism space has adopted the spoon theory from. But this idea that we all have a certain number of spoons that we start the day with, and people who are neurodivergent are going to have a smaller number of spoons to start with, and any task throughout the day. Brushing my teeth could be one, going to a conference, right? Having that conversation, doing this work activity. Different things cost us different amount of spoons. And so someone who's neurodivergent, that it's gonna cost them more spoons. And then the neurotypical, they just know where the supply of spoons is. So if they run out of spoons, they just go get some more spoons. Whereas the person who's neurodivergent or chronic health condition, right, once you're out, this depletion happens, and then you need to recharge. The reason I offer that here is this is really good language for when people are at just like reach their limit, to have some shared language around it. It's like, seems like you might be out of spoons right now. What might you need to do in order to either get more spoons or recover until tomorrow when your energy supply will be restored? And then masking and camouflaging. I think most people will already have a sense of that, right? But it's more than just, I'm going to work, so I'm gonna dress a little bit differently, and I'm gonna be a little bit more professional than I would if I was at home. It's who I am is not right in this space, and so I'm going to need to inhibit what's gonna come naturally. We all do it, but people who maybe ADHD brains, right, where I'm always having a thought that I would love to share, and it's important for me to recognize like not every place and space is right for me to just share my thoughts, but maybe more of them could be. And so that's why I actually did invite you all, if you have thoughts that you want to share, right, because that does take us energy and effort to mask those natural responses. It's also part of being a human in society, is that we're doing what works not only for ourselves but for others, but it comes at a cost. Okay. This was cited on one of Joy's slides, Milton 2012. So if you are not yet familiar with this, this is the double empathy research, and they did a 10-year follow-up. Foundational in switching us from autism as deficits to autism as differences. What they did is they took a group of, or they took individuals, some autistic and some not autistic, and they put them in pairs and had them have conversations. And if you took two non-autistic people and had them have a conversation, that got rated. And then if you took two autistic people and had them have a conversation, that got rated. There was not a statistical significantly different rating in the quality of those communication when you took an autistic person and a non-autistic person, asked them to have a conversation. We then saw statistically significantly worse communication. Some of the interesting research since then, though, is we all, autistic or not autistic, judge people having autistic conversations as worse. There's something about how we perceive maybe the nonverbal communication, some of the tone or the content, the directness, that we're rating that, we're judging it, not rating, we're judging it as worse communication, which is really interesting. So I'm gonna actually ask you all to join me in whatever way works for you in a little activity. If I was in the audience, I would participate by watching. So I truly invite you to do that, if that's how you would be, because if you were just like, oh no, she just asked me to participate. Sorry, I didn't preface it by saying you can just watch. But for those of you who might be okay reading what's up on the slide, this is something that where I'm training right now, when I said, oh yeah, I'm gonna get to go do this presentation, they're like, squirrels and beavers? So like it stood out, and so that affirmed to me. I was thinking about taking it out, but I was gonna keep it in. This is some of the therapy work that I do. There's a couple of the slides where I will actually show it to my therapy clients, and they just have this like really pretty life-altering in the way that they start relating to themselves and others. So if you would like to participate, you all are gonna be squirrels, anybody on this? And you all are now gonna be beavers, okay? So squirrels, beavers. But if you really wanna be a squirrel or beaver on your other side, who am I to stop you, okay? I'm not. So I'll sort of be your narrator. And when there's a little thought bubble that's a squirrel, I'm gonna ask a squirrel to read it. And a little thought bubble that's a beaver, I'll ask a beaver to read it. And you all can just yell out, okay? Let's see how it goes. So squirrels have no problems communicating and making friends with other squirrels. Do I have a squirrel who would wanna read that one? Oh no. Someone else?
Maybe the beavers can help. Great idea, let's ask.
Oh, okay. And beavers have no problem communicating and making friends with other beavers. Could I have a beaver read?
Hey, we could really use some nutshells for the dam.
And someone else?
The squirrels probably have loads. We could ask them.
Okay, here we go. But when squirrels and beavers try to communicate, and then all of the squirrels go ahead and read yours, and all the beavers go ahead and read yours. Go ahead. Oh no, okay. Miscommunication occurs. Whose fault is it? Who is responsible for fixing it? Right? So curiously, society decided that it's only the squirrel's job to repair any communications. What's really important about this slide is it could be squirrels or beavers because we're all part of society. So if anyone will just start on that side and move our way. Does someone want to go ahead and read one?
Beavers are unfamiliar with your squirrel habits, so you need to stop doing it.
You need to be taught how to be more like a beaver.
Beavers don't understand you. You need to change the whole communication style.
I needed a drink of water. That one's my favorite / saddest. Because, right, like, this idea that they're just a squirrel, not a beaver. How very strange. Does anyone else feel like that's a mistake? I will say that, so NeuroWild is a speech and language pathologist in Australia, and I love their content creations because it's taking this research article, right, and boiling it down into something that's very, very digestible. So definitely a resource that I recommend. Also makes things like communication cards and on teachers, pay teachers, and super affordable, and love, love, love those resources. So that was also the main reason we kept that in, is to give you that resource. These are their recommendations. I actually disagree with one, but there's room for that, and that's actually why I'm even showing you that, is because we don't all have to land on the exact same conclusions. So first of all, recognize that autistic people have their own communication style. Miscommunication occurs because of mismatched communication styles, not because autistic people have delayed or disordered skills. And then so this is the one I disagree slightly with. Stop teaching autistic kids social skills. They don't have to learn to be beavers. I absolutely agree with that second part. None of us need to become someone we were not. But I do have a lot of the teens and adults say, I'm glad that I have options. And so I don't ever want to do social skills in a way that says you need to be different. It always should be about how do we all collaborate better and not just teach autistic people to communicate differently, but that we're all figuring out how do we, whoever is we in a particular room, start to communicate. So this is actually really important in dealing with families, right? It's not like, or even you as a clinician, you do not need to speak someone else's language, but they also don't need to speak your language. You figure out every interaction that we ever have as humans is just how do we communicate? And when we don't come in with the idea of this is the right way of communicating, that means I now get to do things like intakes for neuropsych assessment where the person is texting me back using the chat feature rather than talking. Even though they can talk, they can better communicate and explain themselves and express themselves. And I never would have been trained that would be a way of doing an intake session. But when we start saying, well, what works for us, right? Because what if I can't read the text that they're now sending me? I might then need to say, what my limits are, and then we continue to shape together what does it look like. But there is not a right and a wrong way of communicating, right? Okay. So teach everybody that communication is that two-way street, and then ensure the opportunities for unmasking, that you'd have opportunities to be around peers who have similar styles. And I will note, right, neurotypical, this so-called, there are communication problems. It is not as though when you put autistics in a room that we're not going to have communication challenges. It just means that a natural style and preferences are more likely to be similar within the group. Okay, so these are ones. I think we'll skip over here as well. I like these from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, just because we start seeing how does the DSM describe what autism is versus those with lived experience that fits more this affirming framework of differences, right? So the idea that we think differently, process our senses differently, move differently, communicate differently, socialize differently, and might need help with daily living. So this idea of like, what does it mean to be affirming in the first place? This starts to give some language around that. We're still describing the similar process, but we're doing it in a way that respects the individual and says this is a difference, not a deficit. Okay. We are gonna launch into specifically some of the framework around like providing therapy, providing assessment in the sense that that's my work, but also wanting to know like the specific work that you're doing and applying it there. I was so grateful that during my training, a group of researchers in Australia very clearly defined what do we mean by neurodiversity affirming practice. So like as I'm building what my theoretical orientation is, I don't have to do this as an add-on. Like I'm adding neurodiversity affirming in the same way that you would add like cultural humility and other populations that you're working with. This is the bread and butter of what I'm doing, saying like I am an affirming clinician. Well, what do we even mean by that? So also some main principles is going to be to first of all understand what the neurodivergent communication and sensory needs are, validating neurodivergent identity, right? We're not trying to change people. We're actually saying this is a valid and a valid way of being human. We don't need to change you. And then implement client-centered approaches, right? Where the client is getting to drive what is important to them. What are their challenges? What are they telling me their presenting concerns are? And then that's what we're addressing, right? We're not deciding that, oh, your stimming looks like that would probably be a problem. Let's reduce those behaviors. But what are they describing and following their lead? And that gets complicated, right? When we're working with families where parents might have a different, or the two parents, this is one of my family systems, the two parents have very different approaches. One would be more neurodiversity affirming and the other is old guard behavioral of do what I say and my kid's talking back and can you fix him? Like, oh okay. So we get both of these in the system, but so when I say client-centered, I mean the whole client, right? The individual that we're working with, but also the system that they might be in. This is the Flower et al. A graphic from their study that I wanted to show you the graphic, even though I know it's small, so I'll read it. But basically, providing safety to be one's autistic self, authenticity and humility in practice. You've heard me say cultural humility a few times already. That is one of the main things that we need to bring to the table every day. A commitment to continued learning about autism. I don't know about how long each of you has been in this field, but we just continue to grow and change in our understanding of what we even mean when we say autistic, and I think that's going to continue over the next decades, and so making sure that we're staying on top of it, that our clients aren't ahead of us in the understandings. Genuine acceptance and appreciation of autism. If you were trained in a space that told you this is something we're trying to cure, that might be a longer journey for you to like truly embrace an autistic identity and the value of it. But I'm here to tell you when people have supports, right? When we're getting to live as our authentic self, I happen to think a lot of us are pretty cool humans that don't need to be changed, but we do need supports, right? And so being able to come alongside and value the parts, the curiosity and the thoughtfulness, the justice orientation, to really be able to cultivate those, while also saying, like, I see emotion regulation for you is really hard, and I'm wondering if we can come up with some strategies for that. So already talked about person-centered support and validating the autistic experiences. And lastly, and why I spend time going through the Milton and double empathy, is finding ways to communicate. So it doesn't mean we have to be someone that we are not when we are in the therapy room or assessment room and an analysis room. We don't have to change who we are, but we're always going to have a mutuality, right? That when we're communicating, we're going to figure it out together. These are just different ways of doing. Oh, I will, just so you can see on my slides when I'm going through with people different treatment considerations, that we have applied behavioral analysis as both the most common and the most controversial. Why this is important to me is, like, me being here at this conference is so important because when I was in a lot of the neurodiversity affirming spaces, they are anti-ABA for valid reasons of saying it has led to harm in the past, and it leads people to putting themselves to no longer trust their own bodies, and then it makes them vulnerable to future harm. I think we should then change it to not do that anymore, but seeing as how it's what insurance cover, and that there really are a lot of helpful tools in it, like how do we do it? So truly, thank you, Joy, for the work that you and your colleagues are doing to help us all be better at having an affirming approach while doing some of these behavioral strategies. Okay. Here's where I do want you to take, there's 2 slides with some ideas. These are not evidence-based article citations. These are crowdsourced, lived experience. Maybe it was from when I was a client and had a therapist, or maybe it's from the families that I'm working with. It's ideas that I've just heard repeated on and on and on in these spaces, but yet that we don't yet fully have the research evidence base for it. And so please be part of developing this and saying, we know that these approaches are needed and they're useful tools, because we all want to make sure that we're being evidence-based, but also to say these are tips and part of the lived experience that I would love you to think about how you could apply them, how you already might be doing that naturally, or when you might want to start doing that. So at its core, right, one of the most complicating things is working with autistic individuals is we're all different. So what does it even mean to have evidence-based practice that would work for every single one of us? That becomes the complication, where someone might really do well with standard behavioral intervention. Somebody else who's going to perceive their autonomy is threatened every time that you ask them to do something is going to probably have a very different experience of that. And so needing to be very thoughtful on what does the individual in front of me need and how are they responding, remembering the individual. Okay. And so that every single one is going to have unique needs. Some may need a lot of guidance, especially at first. For those of you who are more in psychology, mental health spaces, we often are taught of being a lot more like hands-off. When we say client-led, client-centered, it's actually like go where they go. And so things like, I think there's another one later, but like open-ended questions, that we don't want to be too directive. And I'm letting you know that that's not going to work out so well, but you probably already know that. So thanks for being a room of people who gets it when I say this. And I feel like I've even needed to like apologize to some of my professors for saying the exact opposite things of things they have taught me when I'm going through this. But that's the reality of it, right? For me, for the clients that I am serving, giving options does not direct them to then choose something that they otherwise wouldn't. So rather than the open-ended question, I say, did this or this? And they're like, no, neither of those, it's this. It's having a starting point, right? Or to be able to say, yes, that was exactly it. And some of those moments are the best moments for me because they're like, how did you know, right? I knew because I pay attention, right? So this idea of giving some choice, giving some guidance, deciding, right? So like, working with PDA kids, right? Like nothing can be my idea, but it all has to have a frame and some security around it. So we could do this, or this, or this, or this, or anything else that's in your mind, right? I just provided a framework for our time together. And I said, I'm here to help support. I've got some ideas. It's not up to you to decide. Because when I say to somebody, what would you like to do today? I actually, like, that could lead to a shutdown or a meltdown. It's too much for the system. Like, what do you even mean, right? So providing some choices, and then they can always say no. If you get someone who never tells you no, have a different approach then. I just don't work with a single person who doesn't tell me no all the time. So also fair warning, if you do these things, you are going to get told you are wrong all the time. It doesn't feel great, but it does actually feel great later because you're like, that's what I'm going for here, is like authenticity, right? Where they could tell me exactly what it was that they are needing in any given moment. Provide time for clients to process, work at their pace. Just was doing an intake with parents who are like, we forget that she needs time. And so we're pretty sure we've totally ruined everything. So that's interesting as well. But this idea that their kid needs time to process. And if they just gave her time to process, that she would be able to communicate very fully with them, but instead has the labels of shy and withdrawn and sometimes mute. It's like, are you giving her time to process and to share? Yeah, we forget sometimes. Okay, so this idea, work at their pace and don't have an idea of where you're supposed to get by the end, and instead go in the direction and at the pace that they're going to work. I can't say this one enough, but sorry to repeat it again. Communication is collaborative. Find out what works for each person, you and them. Don't just assume you have to figure out how they communicate and vice versa. So with that, remain flexible in how you communicate and tailor to what each person needs. And then this kind of ties up to earlier, make action steps practical and easy to follow. So not things that are open-ended, but instead very simple and very specific. Demonstrate language hospitality. This gets to the idea of like, I'm going to learn some of the neurodiverse, neurodivergent, know what those words mean, but also ask the person what they mean. This is also going to be for like pronouns that you would ask. We just discovered the brief now lets you choose they, them pronouns. So that's pretty exciting. Like this idea that we're going to ask somebody and then join them in using language that helps them feel seen and heard by us. And then be aware of the sensory environment. And I did put this, in most cases, that means limiting noise, the bright lights and the strong smells. You might have somebody who's a sensory seeker who actually wants the opposite and will do better in the loud, bright environment. But as a great starting point of having calm spaces and checking out the lighting, but as best as possible, have adjustable lighting options and be aware of the different senses and noises in your space. And then create personal safety for the use of fidgets, stimming behaviors, various types of eye contact, and different ways of communicating. The best way I can say this is be yourself in the space. That gives the implicit, and then you can also give explicit permission for people to do what works for them. So sitting in a way that's comfortable for you. I have 2 fidgets. It's a 2 fidget day, not just one in my hand, because I knew that I might. Didn't I only have one when we began? It's fascinating. They emerge because I know I'm going to need them, right? So like when we do what we need for our bodies, it gives permission to others to do the same. And sometimes it's seeing our clients do it that reminds us to have permission, that we're humans too. And then again, just to understand that by not engaging in those types of things that like if our body's needing to move or if we're needing to stand rather than to sit, that it would cost us something to do something other than what's coming naturally in our body. Okay. And then I think we'll run through this. So tips for working with autistic clients. So this is then big buckets. If the only thing we ever did was regulation, co-regulation, and physiological awareness, we've won the game. Because, like I said, the presenting issues are not, I'm autistic, please help me with my autism. It's things like emotional dysregulation. So we see that in behaviors in kids, but we see that in adults with the ongoing depressions and anxieties and meltdowns, right? And I do want to say meltdowns, I heard so many times early on with the clients I was working with, I had a meltdown and it came out of nowhere. I'm like, I don't actually believe that's a thing that happens. And I don't want to discredit your experience that you felt like it came out of nowhere, but it's really powerful to start saying they don't come out of nowhere. And when we actually understand what's happening in a meltdown, I now have some of my adult clients that say, I had a really good meltdown the other day. Or one came into therapy last week, it's like, I need a meltdown so badly and my body's not giving it to me. And I'm like, well, tell me more about that. It's like, when we are pushing ourselves beyond our limits, we have energy that needs to be expelled. And when we view meltdowns as an energy explosion, or one of the kids that I work with, a combustion engine, right? Like the steam needs to come out, then we start being curious about, well, what is leading to me being at this point of needing this eruption of energy? And then the work doesn't stop there. Could I actually do something differently than I'm doing that keeps landing me in meltdown? And I will actually share that of like from my own personal experience before autism diagnosis, sensory differences were pointed out. Hey, what are you doing about all these sensory differences? I was like, what? And then I started to explore, and then that gave me an understanding of what was happening, why I was getting dysregulated. It never gave me the framework of, well, hey, how about you do some things that limit the impact of the sensory environment? So things like noise canceling headphones, the light back there was blinking earlier, so I have pink lenses that kind of help filter out some of the lights, right? Things that I can do to support myself rather than, well, I'm not going to have a meltdown in a public space in a room. That's my kind of autism. I'm going to do that in my hotel room later on. Well, how about I just put on the glasses that limit the light coming in, right? This idea that we can do it differently, that we can actually shape our environment to better suit us. All the classrooms at my college, every professor ever turns the lights all the way up. They don't need to be all the way up. But I have to always put them down a little bit. And if I put them too low, then they turn them all the way back up. So it's even like I have to do something to change the environment. Well, guess what? I finally one day was like, it's worth it. Because I don't have meltdowns all the time anymore. And that's pretty great. And then everyone's like, hey, thanks for turning the lights down. They were too bright. It's usually better for other people too when we change the environment a little bit. So change environments. Don't just change individuals and think that that's the whole thing. So even those of you who are psychologists, who are just working one-on-one with people, change the system. Like that's part of our deal too, right? So actually doing advocacy. And that's empowering for the people that we're working with. Like you don't, because that's what they're feeling. Like I need to be helped. Oh, I forgot about that. I need to be helped, right? Like fix me, help me not respond like this. It's like, how about, we'll just say, if you're in too out of a room, you're always going to get overstimulated. So how do we actually limit that a little bit and do something differently? Okay. So if all we did was help people better understand what the precursors were, so when I say the meltdown didn't come out of nowhere, right? We start exploring. A lot of us tend not to notice anxiety until it's a 10 of 10 anxiety, right? Well, do my cognitive restructuring, does that work when I'm at a 10 of 10? Does the little mindfulness strategy work when I'm at a 10? It doesn't. So the idea that we want to actually start noticing earlier on, where we could actually do some things about it. So really engaging, and thank you to all of you who do this work already, like the interoceptive awareness and helping us get connected to our bodies. Because it's not because we can't connect to our bodies. It's that the world is so overwhelming that we're having to shut a lot of the signals out that our bodies are sending us, right? So help us get back in touch with that. And that is going to be really the biggest and most important work that we can do. And then there's other stuff that comes along with it, like maybe family past or traumatic past that you can then work on when you're coming from that more regulated brain and body. So communication support, like I said, answering questions directly. This is the one where I had to apologize to some of my professors because they're all like, you know, well, why do you ask that question rather than answering? You could do that too, but just like answer our question. We asked it for a reason, and it's kind of invalidating to not answer someone's question from some people's perspectives. So, right, that's different than when they're asking about your personal life. Like, but still answer. Like, actually, that's off limits. I'm not going to share that. Right? I answered, not why did you ask that question? Because the unanchored part, right, to start can be really, really unsettling and can break trust pretty quickly. So that is my recommendation to you. And I know a lot of you are like nodding, like you understand this for this particular population. But also, like, I think there's a lot of value for why have we, in general, valued open-ended questions, right? We don't want to lead people, but we are wanting to do things in a way that works for someone's communication style. Connections and interests. So I did say, like, in the communication, just balance the types of questions. The say what you mean, I almost skipped over that. I use irony, so ironic statements. If you ask, like if I'm just like, I haven't eaten all day, I cannot wait till dinner, and then someone's like, are you hungry? I'm likely gonna say no, because the answer is so obvious to me. Like I just gave you all the information that says, of course I'm hungry. That doesn't work for a lot of my autistic clients because they're like, oh, I would have thought you were. You just said a bunch of things. Like, but they miss that I was being ironic, and just because that's how my brain processes. But remember, it's about two people, so sometimes I'll be like, my brain wants to tell you no because it's just so obviously yes, but yes, I'm very, very hungry, right? So like I still get to be my person, my brain still gets to work the way my brain works, but I'm clear in what I mean. And so some of the kids I work with are like, yeah, irony and sarcasm is lying. So like, you shouldn't lie. You tell me you want to tell me the truth. I'm like, I do want to tell you the truth. Okay, communication, connection and interest. So like this was a big one for some of my supervisors when we started to say, like to actually engage people in their special interests. Some people were afraid that it was like taking things off course, right? Like, well, why are we talking about trains? I'm like, well, I'm talking about trains because with this client, because it regulates them. And I'm trying to, that's my therapy goal, number 1, 2, and 3. So actually, if they want to talk about train signals, not trains, we're going to talk about train signals, right? And then when the trust is developed and when there are opportunities, we're going to be able to do some other work as well. But to find out from people, but is it an avoidance strategy? Know what your therapy goals are, right? If we just avoided something that was hard, well, did we regulate in order to be able to come back in? Or did we avoid and leave and then we missed it? So we want to have curiosity around why somebody might be engaging with their special interest. But in general, any opportunity that you can utilize and engage with people in the things that are interesting to them, there will be so much more buy-in from us. Just being careful with our assumptions. We already talked about just acceptance of themselves. And then just to hold in mind that the vast majority of those of us who are autistic who are coming for services feel broken and feel alone and different. And so our opportunity to normalize what their experiences are and connect people even with other people in the community who might share diagnoses and have lived experience, to create more places where people can have interaction with each other becomes so, so important. And just like the power in the words, like, I don't see anything broken in front of me, but I know you feel broken right now, right? They're able to just start from somebody they trust to explore the idea that maybe they're not broken after all. And then just the importance of autonomy. So do you all have, are there any specific questions that have come up so far? I have a couple other things I'm going to touch on pretty quickly, but I'm wondering if there's any questions up to this point. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a question.
Okay.
So let's see what comes out.
Great.
So I have some teenage autistic clients, let's say early teens, so like late tween, early teen, and that common concern of like, I'm not normal, there's something wrong with me, I'm fundamentally broken is a common theme sometimes. And developmentally, it's a time period when kids want to conform, they want to fit in.
Yeah.
It's super hard for anyone, well, this might be different. It's super hard for a lot of folks, but also during that developmental time period to recognize differences. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about working during that time period with those clients and, you know, trying to connect them with others like them is a goal, but not always possible in rural areas.
Yeah.
And exposing to folks online, but it's the area to really explore.
Yeah, when conforming is almost part of a teenager's identity. But being an individual, right, that's just like their peers. I love teenagers because they're so complex. It's hard. Yeah, so the younger kids are often yet not even noticing the differences, is what I'm seeing, right? So they're not yet doing this I'm different thing. Some of them are, but more than not, they're not. And then around 10, 11, right, and that's actually an important part of identity is like, who am I in these spaces with these other people? So I think it's like when we are demonstrating to somebody that they're not broken, right? When we are affirming their ways of engaging, right? So like the whole train signals thing, like, I'm not interested, and I'm not interested in Ninjago, I'm not interested in Lego Star Wars, but man, I now know a lot about all those things because some of the kids that I work with are. And that to me is like part of the affirming how you getting to be you when you come into this space. My hope is actually that in more spaces they then feel that permission to be themselves. And maybe when they're around their peers, they will still not fully feel like they can fully be themselves. But kind of to your point, like, wouldn't many teenagers also be navigating some of those? So I think the not broken thing can happen just in the context of our relationship, right? And then, so if I'm not broken, then that is actually going to be a dissonance when I'm trying to change myself to be more like my peers. So that's my first thought, is like the power of just letting someone be and explore in a way that works for them, and to really encourage them to do that, not just to create permission for it, but like that I'm actually engaging someone. Like, I showed up one day and said, I'm trying to make this window of tolerance sheet into Lego Star Wars, but I know nothing about Lego Star Wars. Oh, whatever will I do? And then I closed the book. He's like, I know about Lego Star Wars. I'm like, you're not interested in hypoarousal, which is, right? Like, I got to download give you some vocab. So no, I won't even ask you, right? So like, what was I doing? I was saying your way of engaging in the world, like, it's welcome here. And I think that makes a difference for kids. But I think there just aren't, like, we could actually have more groups available, and we don't. So I would also encourage all of it. Like, that's one of my big goals for this next year, is how do we actually create more of the spaces that a lot of us need? Because I think that starts answering some of those questions. Like, we are so digitally connected at this point. There isn't a good reason we don't have more of them. So those are two thoughts. And if I have more, I will share them. Yeah.
So there's a really interesting space. It's not a therapy space per se, but there's a space called OutSchool, and it's an online space where just about any topic can be explored by anyone who wants to like take a class on it. And so my son, who is has autism, explored his like English and writing and also his identity through a class that was being taught through the lens of D&D. And so it's like
And so it's called Outspace.
but it's a very good connective space to a lot of special needs.
Yeah, so Outspace.
OutSchool.
Oh, Outschool. Outschool. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. It reminds me of like the meetup groups that adults have, right? Like, based on shared interest. And that really is like the idea that we have. Yeah, there's a Dungeons and Dragons group at the college where I am, and for the undergrads, and the idea that all of them are neurodivergent surprises no one, right? Like, no one. Okay, but so does, like, having more and more of these groups and actually being intentional and across the lifespan, and understanding that there actually are a lot more like opportunities for kids to have support, even though kids are historically under-resourced in mental health spaces. We're still fighting with some of that. And then also, like, across the spectrum, right? Like, what would it mean for somebody who's non-vocal versus somebody who is hyperverbal? And are we going to, will the same group work for them? Hopefully, but also maybe not. And so, like, how do we actually create spaces that are accessible to people? But I think ones like that are really, really important. Yeah, special interest groups. Cool. Any other questions, things that we can address? Or ways in which you're wondering how this maybe would apply to some of the people that you're working in? Or did you come in already having all these are all frameworks that you had, and you just got to take a break for a little bit? Okay, I want to talk two more ideas that I've got that I want to make sure we hit on. One, I actually call this cultural considerations, but with a specific focus on LGBTQ issues. The actual statistics aren't super, they're not things I'm going to focus on. A lot of it is the reason for that is we just really don't know. All we know is it's a lot, because there's things like statistics anywhere between 15 and 70%. Well, what does that statistic mean? It means that in the research that we're doing, we're finding a high co-occurrence. But so a higher percentage of autistic people identify across the LGBTQ spectrum than in the general population. So like I said, anywhere 15 to 35% among autistic people without intellectual disability, and another showing the prevalence as high as 70%. And then autists are also more likely to be asexual and or aromantic. This is one of the next slide as well from Neurodivergent Insights. So if you don't already have this resource in your bucket of your toolkit, like absolutely Dr. Megan Ananeth, who is a clinical psychologist by training as well, is autistic herself. Really amazing resource. It does Venn diagrams of like ADHD and autism, and then you get to see the things that are in the overlap, right? And then what would be characteristic of each individually. And I'm actually using those a lot in feedback sessions these days of helping people understand like parts of themselves, why we aren't landing on one diagnosis maybe, but why those parts of themselves that they identify. So like maybe we're seeing ADHD with autistic traits, but all the autistic traits are the parts that are the overlap with ADHD, right? So these really, really good resources and simplifying more complex topics. And then also along the lines of LGBTQ, specifically to talk about trans. So like the idea that not only sexuality, but also gender identity, that research is suggesting, right, just a really high co-occurrence. 4.2 to 26% of people who present at gender dysphoria clinics had an autism diagnosis. I did not mention this previously, but there are 2 groups now where if you are in one of the settings, they recommend an autism assessment, eating disorder, and then gender identity type assessment, just to say there's just such a high co-occurrence of people with eating differences and different expressions of their gender identity in the autistic population. So also to say, if you are working with someone who's autistic, you want to be aware of the ways in which they might have different eating patterns that you might want to support and make sure they're getting the nutrition that they need. And then also, what's their expression along the lines of gender and also on the previous slide, their sexuality. So I was having a conversation earlier today about the idea that I really am clear that I don't think I could be neurodiversity affirming without LGBTQ affirming as well. In some of the spaces that I inhabit, that is a little more complicated. Thinking like historically evangelical Christian spaces that have some pushback on whether or not you can be fully LGBTQ affirming, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I just don't care, because like the population that I work with, this is their lived experience, and that is what I care about, and I do want to be affirming within the context that they are, and many of them are in like some evangelical spaces as well, like, and they are still there and they are valued. So just to say, to understand this overlap. And then I'm not going to spend much time on PDA, but I did want to give you some, this is from the PDA North America group, so this pervasive drive for autonomy, individuals that are having, and I do have more slides if you want to come up and grab them. I'm happy to share the whole presentation with you all if you don't already have access to it. This idea of using declarative language, I can still be the adult in the room and somebody who just by nature of my position holds a little bit more power and do things that don't need to assert that I am the person in power, like using really like pointed directives like you need to do this. Instead, we can, like, rather than say, what did you do at school today? Has anything happened in your life this week? Guess what questions don't get answered from PDAers? And I love it. The kids that I work with just don't answer. They don't even tell me I'm not going to answer. They just like keep going. Like, I'm not interested in that. That's a demand. I'm not. Like, the fact that it just didn't even cross their radar that they had to answer it, I love. But also it's like, oh, whoops, yep, I just asked how your week is. But instead I get to say, like, I've been thinking about, or like, I remembered I was out for a run today and I was wondering what you were up to this week. I'm much more likely to get some response to it. And this is another complication. Did I just use self-disclosure in the therapy room about that I was out for a run, right? But it works for the kids because it creates like this distance that I might be wondering about what they are, like, and they might have an answer for it rather than feeling the pressure of answering my specific question and knowing that it's a question coming from a therapist, right? Because I've even just tried, like, I'm wondering what you might think. It doesn't get it. So like, what, like a week ago, I was remembering something about this, right? So we're creating some distance and doing it. So like, I notice, I imagine, I'm thinking, I'm worried that. I actually had one of the kids that is dealing with a lot of anxiety. I'm like, I'm really worried that you might do something to hurt yourself. And she's like, well, I think you need to get a worry box. Let me tell you about the worry box that my teacher told me about at school. We don't need to be worried. I was like, okay, well, okay. Sometimes we're worried about things that could happen. You're like, okay, great. But again, I get to learn from the kids that I'm working with all the time. She told me about ants too. Do you all know about ants? Not the little bugs, but something antecedents that she learned about that helps her with anxiety. So also sharing observation. Ants? I didn't learn well enough. No, it's automatic negative thinking. Yeah, automatic negative thinking. So what you do when you have an ant, so that automatic negative thinking is to try to replace it with a positive or a neutral thought. I was paying attention. They really do teach me. Okay. And we also talked about like why it's so important to have things like acronyms and what is it? It's not just an acronym when it actually spells out another word, acrostic or something. Anyway, to say those are helpful learning tools because otherwise I would never have been able to pull that up for you. So anyway, this idea that we can create some distance and allow, so just to say the behavioral characteristics on this next slide, so like we're seeing behavioral challenges, but what's actually happening is so much underneath it. And when we as the adults, and this even applies a little bit to the teens, right? Like when they're just having a hard time and we get curious about what's under it rather than just try to address what other people are already addressing, it really empowers them and helps them feel seen and heard and kind of reclaim parts of their identity. So when we know that there are just a lot of different challenges happening for an individual, we're then able to start actually affecting what the behaviors are, interestingly, right? Without actually addressing them directly, and instead saying like, what if you're more regulated? What if we aren't overwhelming your sensory system all the time? What if we aren't putting the demands on you all the time? What if we're using some of this more declarative language when we can, right? Because there are always going to be instances where I need to tell you something very specific in a very short amount of time to keep you safe, and I need you to hear it, right? So how do we protect those opportunities by being a little bit less directive in the other moments and requiring things and creating those power differentials. Okay, and then I think I'm going to land here and then leave us with a little bit of time still if you would want to ask additional questions. Some of my favorite resources that I could not do this work without it. The Autism Self-Advocacy Network is just a really good place to send people who are have lived experience themselves, as well as parents to kind of hear from people with lived experience. Dr. Megan Ananef does have a podcast as well that they co-host called Divergent Conversations. So if you're needing something additional to listen to, really appreciate that. But also has, like I said, the Misdiagnosis Mondays. That's those Venn diagrams and then articles that go along with it. But loads and loads of resources. Dr. Donna Henderson co-wrote the book, she's a clinical neuropsychologist, Is This Autism? A Guide for Clinicians and Everyone Else. And there is a diagnostic guide that's a second book, a companion guide to the first book, but really helpful in helping individuals who have lower support needs, autistic presentations, but that very much share the same diagnostic criteria. And then Sunny Jane Wise, I had pointed out in NeuroWild as well, who create visual content that boils down some of these more difficult to understand. And this Neurodiversity 101 is a full PDF that you can get on the Neurodivergent Insights website that has all the definitions, has ideas about what practice would look like. That can be either for yourself, the places where you work, or families that you're working with, saying this is a framework that we're applying here. Where we do recognize, right, the neurodiversity framework taken too far would say that people don't have problems, right, just differences. That someone who's autistic doesn't have any challenges, they're just differences. That would be taking it too far. Hopefully you didn't hear any of that to me today. It's a person plus environment. Every single day we're facing challenges, right? But are they things that we can help people address the barriers and see what the barrier to access actually is and start breaking down some of those barriers? Or is it going to leave the person feeling like there aren't any barriers out there, so because things are hard, I'm a problem. Something must be wrong with me. And I think that is the takeaway of like the benefit of this framework is dignity and respect, which is in all of our ethical codes, right? That we are here to better the people's lives that we're working with. And when we see someone as just a behavior problem, when we see somebody as just the symptoms that they're bringing in and the deficits model, I think it can end up being really dehumanizing, but it also can just make the person feel like they are less than and they are broken and they are a problem and it's hopeless, right? Whereas instead this framework allows us to say, hey, what if we were more curious about what's creating the limitation? What if we were more curious about how dysregulation is happening and how regulation looks for your brain and your body? And that curiosity is then the biggest gift we give to them. And honestly, like it is it's more a rewarding framework for me to work out of, because every day, rather than just assume I have these standard, like try this and if it doesn't work, then you must not have done it right. That's what some colleagues with OCD have said about ERP, right? You must just not have done it right because you're still happy, right? Well, what if it wasn't done in a way that works for their brain and body, right? What if there's another way in that's gonna allow people to trust us, and then also have the types of change that we're hoping to see, right, where people are not viewing themselves as broken and then getting to live and flourish in whatever their calling is going to be. Well, thanks so much for joining. I'm going to hang out because I do also know like sometimes just asking rather than in the group setting works better for people. And then please do feel free to connect at any point. Love to continue the conversation.